Hello and welcome to another episode of Disc and Dice. This is episode 19. My name is Tim, and with me, like usual, are my co-hosts Paul.
Hello.
And JT. How you doing?
Hello, everybody. I'm doing great. How are you going?
We kind of, you only got a hello in there, and JT got a question there, Paul. So how are you doing as well?
I'm also doing well. I was kind of rude. I didn't ask how you were. JT once again has the best manners.
That's it.
Whoa,
we really do need to give credit where it's due to his parents. Once again,
Yes.
it's like
I'm
we're
trying
moving
to
away from.
impress.
We're moving away from Geralt of Rivia being the patron saint of this podcast and it becoming your parents, JT.
Yes. Kudos to John and Rena. They've done a fine job, and yes, can't thank them enough.
Now, if it turned out that they were avid gamers, that would really be the cherry on top.
I think my dad actually did buy a PS2, and never ever he never ended up playing anything. I think he bought Gran Turismo 3 for it, and one day he was like, "Where's the PS2 gone?" And it turns out my brother had borrowed, in quotations, borrowed it from him about 3 years prior, and it took him that long to notice. So there you go.
I actually got into gaming through my dad when I was a kid. That he used to play like all the old like PC DOS games, and that was my window into playing games, is him playing that stuff. So I would watch him play, and then I started playing them. And he doesn't play any kind of games anymore, but yeah, that was my first step into the hobby.
Yeah, that's actually the same for me as well. I remember when I was really little, Dad had like the original Duke Nukem, which was like that side scroller, on like an actual floppy disk, like the massive ones that actually flopped. And like we just had that one game, and then like it got lost. And to this day, I'm certain that Dad got sick of us demanding to play that game.
He just like destroyed it?
Yeah, or like hid it somewhere, because he's like the most organized person on the planet, especially filing away his programming and stuff and all his like, because he was a work from home computer programmer, so he didn't just lose his floppy disks and stuff, right? I'm sure of it. But also on the same note as what you were saying, JT, I'm pretty sure the only reason consoles came into my house is because my mum and dad went to a friend's place and he was showing them like one of the early Tomb Raiders, like when like the tutorial mission is like just the obstacle course outside her mansion, and they were like, "Whoa,
Yes,
look at the graphics! This is amazing!" And now it looks like a foot, but like they thought that was incredible, and so they bought the PS2 ostensibly for us, but it was really so that when we were finally in bed at night, they could bust out Tomb Raider.
I mean, if I've ever have children of my own, or my partner does have a child, so I guess that's I kind of come into that, but I will be continuing to buy computers and games and consoles, again in quotations, for him, so that I can bring him into the world of gaming. But obviously I'll be living very much vicariously through his use of the console, and it'll basically be just justified purchases, right?
And pretty much he will never be allowed to play them. That's basically it.
That's right, yes.
Timmy, you were talking about consoles coming into the house. I was just thinking about how I've mentioned this before on the podcast, that I didn't play consoles at all until the original Xbox, and even then I would really only say it was the 360 that I started playing consoles, and we just didn't have them all in our house, and lots of my friends had them, but I remember my parents were just kind of like, I don't know, it was almost kind of like, we're not going to get you one of those consoles, like, you can go and do other things with your time, but they were totally okay with PC gaming. So now I think about it, I'm guessing my dad must have been a very early iteration of the PC Master Race.
Fair enough. So what you're saying is like we should get him on an episode with Moz, and they can tell us all about how we're heathens for playing consoles?
Basically, yeah, they can give us like the history of the PC Master Race movement.
Well, speaking of PC Master Race, JT, how are you going with that Steam catalog? How have you been? What have you been playing this week?
I'm slowly chipping away at it. But just trying to think of what I that's right. I did end up finishing Carmageddon Max Damage. I didn't have too much left in that, so that's another one off. Except I've kind of been getting a bit sidetracked, inevitably sidetracked as I go through, because Paul and I have actually been jumping into some Project Zomboid, and myself as well, just playing a bit of ARMA 3, which I always do. But yeah, I guess that's kind of where I'm at with the Steam library, is very, very slowly getting through it. But yeah, usually I'll just get sidetracked. So that's kind of where I'm at with that at the moment.
And speaking of Carmageddon, after last episode, we were hanging out and you had me give Carmageddon on phone a shot. Like I was playing the mobile app version of it.
Yes, that's right.
And you got onto that because you caught me being extremely rude and playing a little racing game on my phone while we were hanging out. But I absolutely couldn't stand the handling of the way that mobile app worked.
Well, to be fair to me,
it all felt so heavy and delayed in the movements.
To be fair, how many gins had you had by that point?
I'd had a couple. I'm not gonna lie.
No, that is how that game works. Is the handling is meant to be very, very, I guess you could say, floppy. The delay is there because it's a car combat game. You're meant to crash into things. It's meant to be a bit of chaos. So I guess that's
I got the impression that like the very kind of slow acceleration and the difficulty in making a very quick turn and stuff was kind of intentional and the point of the game. So like you could, because you're playing against NPCs most of the time, and you're not just like cleaning up all the time.
And just to put it in perspective, there is one of the cars you can actually race in that has a jet engine strapped to it, and it actually accelerates as thus. And you can clear like the entire map just by tapping the button, and it's just in there as just one of the normal cars. It's impossible to control. You actually can't control it, but that's kind of, I guess that's what the game goes for.
Is it like you can only accelerate using that, or like once you're pointing at something, you can slam the rocket and hope for the best?
Basically, I mean, you can steer, but not when you're flying through the air. So
right,
that's Carmageddon in a nutshell, really.
Fair enough. But yeah, so that's the Steam library update. But what have you been playing since last episode in general?
Well, like I said, Paul and I have been jumping on Project Zomboid a bit, and I myself have been playing a fair bit of ARMA. I'm always on ARMA. I think I'm up to going on 2,200 hours in it. But because it's so mod friendly, there's a lot of mods you play online, and I sort of jump in and see what some of the new ones. So I've been playing one known as Exile. It's a little bit like DayZ, but without zombies. Very much open world survival. And yeah, I've been clocking up a few hours in that over the past few weeks. So
was that
good?
Was that ARMA 3?
It was ARMA 3. It's a mod for ARMA 3 called Exile.
Right.
Which
okay.
some people may or may not have heard of.
Right, because I played a bit of ARMA 2 back in the DayZ phase when that was kind of all the rage. That was my first introduction to the ARMA series, and I played that and then kind of came back to it every now and then when there was that same kind of thing, when there was a mod that, you and a couple of other guys, actually, JT, were quite into it. When there was a mod that everyone was playing, I'd sort of jump back in and play it for a little bit. But ARMA 3 is something I haven't played.
Yeah, I remember JT. Like, I've not played ARMA myself, and I think it was possibly even ARMA 2 that you were playing. But I used to watch you play a lot of that, and I remembered. I don't know if this was one of the mods, but the version you would play was kind of like hyper realistic and like kind of one shot to the head region you were done, as opposed to most shooters where you can take some absolute punishment and then just get up and keep playing. But it looked extremely frustrating because you were constantly just like on a hillside and you hadn't seen anybody around you, and you just get picked off, and then it's start again.
Those kind of games they're a different kind of beast, I guess. And they're the kind of games that reward that sort of high level of patience, I guess, when you're playing. But I can totally understand that it can be completely frustrating for any new player. I mean, it still is frustrating for me sometimes.
Is that like the Dark Souls of shooters?
Potentially. The problem with ARMA as well, though, is that it's also quite clunky. I kind of find it a bit charming, to be honest. I kind of find the clunkiness, once you master it, you're that much better than everyone else. Not because you're good at aiming the gun; it's because you've mastered the controls.
Yeah,
but,
right.
But yeah, it's patience is very much a virtue when you're playing ARMA 3, or just any ARMA for that matter.
Yeah, the two things you guys are talking about are both things that turned me off ARMA, in that it was like, it's too realistic for me. With the sort of, I had that experience so often of being killed by someone who was extremely far away and I never saw them coming, and that was kind of it. And, I get that, the game is kind of going for a different level of realism, but it just wasn't something that I really wanted. Like, I'm not a big shooter fan as it is, but I liked the whole kind of like chaotic survival thing of DayZ and a few of those mods that I play. But yeah, I kind of really bounced off the like ultra realism of ARMA. And like you said, JT, like I'm sure ARMA 3 is better with this, but like ARMA 2, like I found to be, for me, like I really couldn't get to grips with just the way it controlled, like that kind of clunkiness. Like again, that might be a realism thing. Like I kind of have thought about this from time to time, that maybe it's not clunky, maybe it's just that, being a soldier would be difficult and it's probably, closer to real life. But for me, it's just like, I didn't want that experience to be like real life at all. Like I wanted it to be a game.
There's an interesting discussion to be had there about where the line is for realism, like, versus, challenge and enjoyment, or, like some people need that kind of element of realism to be able to enjoy it. Because like that line is different in different kind of games, right? Like people talk about The Witcher being clunky. And I think it's because he has the momentum of a real person, right? As opposed to just being able to swing a longsword and then duck out of that at the last minute just because you changed your mind. But
that's right. He has weight to it, I think.
Yeah, but sticking to ARMA just for a second, JT, you talked about the fact that there's just hella mods for that. Is there a certain one or type of gameplay that you in particular enjoy for ARMA?
I mean, a lot of the mods, when you're looking at ARMA, I do with actually making it even more realistic, and that's in a couple senses. Some of that realism comes from just more accurate real world army representation. So, you might have a accurate tank or something that someone spent, hundreds of hours making, or guns, or a map. Maybe people make a lot of huge real world locations. And then some people also make a bunch of mods that enhance the realism even more. Like you shoot a rocket launcher, if you're standing behind it, you'll get killed by the backblast that isn't normally in the game. And so there's a lot of things like that. Like you can tapping your the magazine for your gun on your head to see if it's got bullets in it or not, because it doesn't tell you otherwise. Very, very specific stuff. Those aren't really for me, because I think they make it too realistic, and then that's where, even for me, it's taking away from the core game mechanics. But the mods that I'm usually into are the ones that sort of make it a little bit more of a survival simulator, kind of like what Paul was mentioning before, like DayZ or Exile, or there was another one. The name of it evades me right now, but there's Wasteland, and small mods like that. And they also streamline the game a bit, so that you can jump in, find some people to shoot in multiplayer and whatnot. So they're the ones that I'm usually into.
What kind of speaking about sort of the realism stuff in ARMA, how much like UI and HUD do you usually have in the game? Because I know, JT, we've had this conversation like offline before about like the Battlefield games, how they kind of have, like in terms of shooters, they have a bit of like UI overload, in that you're spotting everything and you have your objectives, and the whole thing is kind of like there's like a 3D visualization of all these things in the world in front of you. How much UI do you get in ARMA?
Well, it changes on the difficulty, and also the UI is highly customizable. So you can choose where things appear and what things appear. But on say a hardcore server, you'll get basically nothing. I mean, you won't even tell you how many rounds are in your gun, what selection of fire mode or things like that are on there. The only thing it might tell you is what your stance is, whether you're sitting or standing up.
Mm-hmm.
But then that can dial all the way back to basically be like Battlefield and have basically everything, like a 3D sort of overlay of where things are, where your squad mates are, where enemies are. And so it's very, very adaptable. Usually it depends on the server that you go into as to how much UI you have in there. Most of them usually tend to have that Battlefield sort of level to it. I think maybe because it just more people are comfortable with that.
Right.
And also the ability to change between third person and first person is something that ARMA has. And so, in a hardcore server, you won't have that ability. You'll be locked to first person, so it makes, moving around much more difficult. But then on the other hand, a lot of servers have it so that you can just change into third person and you can, peer over fences, or you can see a lot more of the world around you. It makes it a bit more accessible to play.
And what's your preference with that kind of stuff?
It depends. I mean, if I'm on, say, a King of the Hill server, which is sort of like a deathmatchy game mode where everybody tries to take over a town, I prefer that to be in hardcore, because it gives away a bit too much when the other enemy can be peering over a fence and you think you've got the jump on them when you actually don't. Just makes those sort of game modes a little bit more exciting when you sort of don't know the danger present to you. So that's probably my preference, is to have it more hardcore and with less tells to tell you what's going on in the world.
Like I remember when we used to play DayZ, that playing in third person gave you such a huge advantage over playing in first person, because you had such a wider field of view, and like you kind of said, you're able to sort of see over walls that you would otherwise be behind and things like that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that's something that for me, I don't really care too much for. But if it's in a server, I'll still obviously deal with it. But yeah, I'm very much into having it, so that everybody sort of has that same level of, oh my God, like what the fuck is going on? So yeah.
Speaking of oh my God, what is going on moments, I guess the other game that you mentioned that you've been playing, JT, is Project Zomboid, which the two of us have both been playing together. And for people who aren't familiar with Project Zomboid, I guess I would describe it as a roguelike survival game that is set in a post-apocalyptic zombie setting, and it's kind of a top-down isometric thing in terms of graphics, with I guess they're kind of like 3D sprite graphics, something like that. It's sort of very low tech in terms of the graphics, but super granular and detailed in terms of the survival aspects. So yes, you're sort of dealing with like food, thirst, temperature, illness, nutrition as well is like a system in the game. Depending on what you eat, you gain and lose weight and can be healthy or unhealthy. And it sort of simulates a lot of quite mundane aspects of survival, I think, which I really enjoy, that you're not necessarily dealing with kind of huge, big, crazy situations. You're often just dealing with sort of scavenging and day-to-day things about staying alive and keeping safe. And this game has been in early access for years at this point, but I think JT and you and I have been playing this on and off for years as well, and it's always felt quite complete to me. Like I don't really feel like I'm playing an early access game.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And the other thing that is, I guess, an important system in the game is combat, which is really quite simple. You kind of you have weapons. Usually you're using melee weapons. There are guns in the game, but they attract a lot of zombies. And you're basically just hitting zombies and then stomping on them till they die. And it's all kinds of different weapons in the game. But I guess the interesting thing is that combat can get dangerous so quickly. So if you're just taking on one zombie, there's basically no danger at all. But you can very quickly get overwhelmed because it has a really cool feature, which is a vision cone for your character. So because it's isometric and you're looking down on them, you can see the whole world 360 degrees around your character. But you have a vision cone the direction you're facing, which is the only area that you can see things that change. So if there is a zombie that is behind you and then you look at it and look away, it will slowly just fade out. And if it approaches you, you won't know that it's happening. And it's a really, really cool system, especially when you're in buildings, because you can very easily think that, you're just dealing with some zombies in this room, and then all of a sudden you're overwhelmed by two coming from behind. And yeah.
And that kind of it fading out, and then, because you've looked away from it, that keeps you looking back over your shoulder in much the same way you really would always be doing in like a post-apocalyptic situation with no laws and safety and stuff, Like that's kind of a very interesting mechanic.
Yeah, I think it's something that's kind of like, it seems just very sort of simple, and you kind of just accept it and move on when you play. But when I was kind of thinking about the game to talk about on the pod, I kind of thought about it as like, it's kind of one of the key mechanics of the game is the fact that you don't have that 360-degree vision.
One other big takeaway from Project Zomboid is that no matter how long you play it for, one of the givens is that you will die at some point. The game is set on this premise that even before you go in and the game loads up, it says this is the story of how you died. So you might play the game for months. You'll at one point you're going to get overrun by zombies. Or you might leave an oven on when you're sleeping and burn the house down that you're in. There's no real way around it. So I guess that's kind of one of the big points of the game.
Yeah, like I think from the game that we've been playing, JT, you died very early on because you ate raw meat and then got sick. And we just didn't manage the illness, and
we didn't know that I was sick. We thought that I was actually bitten or scratched by a zombie, and that's what was causing me to die. But what it was is that I ate the raw meat, and I just couldn't. That's right. We couldn't manage the illness. We couldn't find enough food for me to eat. I was slowly dying a lot. I was very thirsty all the time, and it just eventually, it got me. I think I was in a bedroom, and then you came up, and I was a zombie.
That's so cool. Can I just ask, was it only once you died that it revealed what your cause of death was, or was there a way for you to work out what it was that you just didn't notice straight away?
I don't really remember. I don't think it tells you how you died per se.
No, it doesn't.
I think we did a bit of metagaming. We had a look outside on some wiki pages for the game to see what my symptoms meant. And that's the thing about it, though.
That's so good.
There's a few things that those things can mean. One other thing that's important to mention is it has a trait system. So, but when you make your character, there's negative and positive traits that you choose that have to balance each other out before you can make the character. So, for instance, you might be a firefighter who you've picked a trait that you are, sort of quite good at stamina and running because you're a firefighter. But on the other hand, what it might want you to do is pick, to offset the points from that, pick something else that's equally as bad. So, for instance, you might pick something called, you'll be a hypochondriac. That's one of the traits. So what happens is that the game tells you that you think you're getting sick, and you don't know if you are or not because your trait is that you're a hypochondriac. So you might start feeling nauseous for absolutely no reason. And you're like, well, is this me being actually sick, or is it because I chose the trait of being a hypochondriac? And there's a lot of really cool gimmicky. Well, I wouldn't even say they're necessarily gimmicks. I mean, they really, really do shape how you play the game.
And can I just ask, going back to like the scenario that you mentioned, how you said you were upstairs in a bed and then Paul came back up and you were a zombie. Were you guys like on some sort of like team speak? Were you able to tell him, hey, I've turned into a zombie? Or does it stop you from communicating in that case? Or did you role play it and not like tell him? Like, what was the situation there?
We didn't really roleplay in that instance, but
No.
I think at this stage we're still sort of trying to grapple some of the newer mechanics well. So we're not going too hardcore, but I think that's a great point, Tim. Like,
just
that would
start
be a great
moaning
way to
into
do
the
it.
microphone.
Well, that's
like
I'm really
talking
thinking.
you're like, yeah.
I'm really thinking the next time it happens is that I might not say anything, so that when Paul inevitably comes to check on me, or vice versa, if he does it, we're just going to walk in and there's just going to be a zombie there. So I think it'd be a neat little addition to the game.
Like in that situation,
bringing it into the real world.
In that specific situation, I think we had figured out that you were dying, and we weren't really sure what it was, but we kind of guessed that, like, all right, at some point you are going to die because your health was just running out. And so then we just kind of shut you in a room upstairs, and
that's right.
Yes. You told me when you died. But just sort of back to that point about sort of the way that system works, kind of in answer to your question, Timmy, you just get kind of notifications on your like health screen. You just get told things like that you've been scratched, and it doesn't tell you, oh, you have, you've caught the zombie virus and you're going to turn in this amount of time. You just know that you've been scratched, and you have to basically treat that wound and hope that it doesn't hope that you haven't been infected. But the game never kind of gives you any indication of that. So like in JT's situation, we had both been scratched because we had been overwhelmed at one point and had to run from zombies. So we'd both been scratched. We'd both treated the scratches, but then he just wasn't getting better. And so we were kind of in this situation where we didn't know whether it was the scratch, because eventually the scratch stopped bleeding and then it kind of healed. And that's how we were able to tell that it wasn't the scratch that killed him, because that kind of, that injury went away. But the whole time before that, we assumed that, he's got the zombie virus, and this is why we can't get this under control. And so there's it's really cool situations like that where you just have to, you have to figure it out, or you have to kind of guess judgments based on the information the game gives you, and just try and deal with it as best you can, which is cool. The other thing I wanted to mention was the trait system that JT talked about. I think that's also a really sort of important part of the game, because it means that you never are creating a character who is good at everything. And I think if you go into Project Zomboid trying to min-max a character who has no flaws, then you're kind of missing the point a little bit. And because it's kind of a roguelike, as JT said, because you're expected to die in every game, and you can respawn back into the same world, by the way, which is also important, that every character is kind of just supposed to be specialized. So at the moment, the character I have in our game is focused on carpentry and first aid, but I've taken a bunch of negative traits to balance that out so I could buff those more. But when I make another character after that, in the game JT and I are currently playing, we really kind of need someone who's good with electronics, because we've found a good base and we want to kind of wire up some things there. If my character dies, when I make my next character, maybe I will give them buffs in electronics, because I know that's a skill we're going to need, but it will mean that they are not as good as carpentry as the last character. And you kind of have to approach each one like that, I think, is you specialize a character, and then when they die, that's fine. You just try something different the next time.
You mentioned, you've implied that, you will be leaving the game you guys have been playing together and coming back to it when you're both free and stuff. If one of you were to jump out of the game, does your character remain in there, or what, in terms of, because it seems like they've gone to great lengths to kind of maintain a level of realism in this game. Will it keep JT's avatar in there and he'll just be left wherever JT left him, or will it boot you to a title screen and you can do your own game, or what's the go with jumping in and out of playing with other people?
The way it works is it's sort of like standard kind of PC game system here, which just that one of us hosts the game, and so I host the game and JT joins, and when he leaves, his character disappears, and when I leave, the whole game shuts down. And so he can't play without me, and if I play without him, his character isn't in the world. So it basically just works like that. You can, I think, as you can with most of these games, you can get a dedicated server if you pay for it, to be on all the time, or I think maybe there are like PvP servers that are run for the game that are up all the time that you can play on. But if you want to have like your own little separate world like we do, then basically it kind of only works when both of you are there. So it doesn't extend to a point where, you know, you can be killed by zombies when you're not playing in real life.
Yeah. Yep. Cool.
Yeah. And I guess, yeah, the only other thing to say about it is like just talking about the game that JT and I are playing, because we kind of started out fortifying like a farm that was sort of in the middle of nowhere because it was easily defendable and we were able to sort of see what was coming from miles around. And then we eventually decided that, all right, we need to move to somewhere else that's going to be a bit better, a bit more central, a bit easier for us to kind of scavenge and find new stuff. And we ended up going on this massive road trip because they've added cars into the game since either of us last played. So we found a car and we kind of loaded up with a bunch of our stuff and we just went like driving across the map trying to find a place that was suitable for us to set up a better base. And we did that for like a whole night. We just went on this huge road trip. We found like a shooting range in the middle of the forest that was just full of all these amazing guns, but we didn't really have the room to carry them. And then we ended up sort of doing this huge loop. Oh, we found a mole was one of the other things, which I had never seen. I think it's been added recently as well. It was just this like enormous mole, which we kind of had this idea that, oh, well, you know, it's a zombie game. There's always a mall in a zombie movie, so let's go and like check out the mall and see if we can set ourselves up in there. And there was just
bad idea.
Yeah, way too many zombies in there, and we very nearly died just trying to.
So what you're saying is Zack Snyder set very unrealistic expectations with his Dawn of the Dead remake.
Yes, don't go to the mall.
Yeah, like the mall was now a place that I think we would like to go back to when we are very, very well prepared. But yeah, that was kind of fun. And we ended up we actually, in a kind of weird way, we ended up looping back to the place where we started and just finding a really good kind of factory warehouse site in there. And we're kind of now going through the process of fortifying that and establishing kind of a secure base where we can do like scavenging trips from to try and find cool stuff.
I'm really impressed with kind of like the breadth of this world. Like it sounds really, really cool.
Yeah, the world is like just in terms of size, the world is quite big. It's been expanded a lot. When I first played, there was 2 towns, and now I think there are 5 plus lots and lots of little kind of settlements that you can check out. But yeah, in terms of the breadth of what you can do, it's really, really detailed. Like you can get really granular with systems like farming or carpentry and crafting and stuff like that. The only thing I would say is that the game gives you no guidance about what you should be doing. And I don't mean in terms of tutorials, I mean in terms of things like end gamer objectives. There is nothing like that. There's no aim to...
Is there an end gamer objective though? It seemed to me kind of like just a survival game.
No, it is. It is
I
just...
think you make your own, right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. There is no like objective to achieve. You set your own goals and decide what you want to do, which I know for some people, I've talked to some people about this game and they haven't enjoyed that part because they've felt like they wanted a bit more guidance there. But, you know, for us, like we were finding a place to establish a base, and now we've found that base. Well, then we'll have to have a think about what it is we want to do next, and we kind of adjust our goals like that. So it's very kind of open-ended like that, like a lot of survival games, I guess. But yeah, that's Project Zomboid, which I think we'll probably be coming back to in future episodes because JT and I are pretty into that, and we're working real slowly on getting Timmy to get a PC so he can join us, and he'll get there eventually.
Yes.
But in the dark times of your PC-less gaming, what have you been playing, Timmy?
Well, anybody who listened to the last episode knows that we spoke about mobile games, and we spoke a lot about the kind of mobile games that we enjoyed. And what made a good mobile game. And in that episode, I gave a couple of examples of the types of games that just do not work on mobiles. And those were racing games and Tetris as examples of games that I really enjoy playing, but just don't like on mobile. Since that episode, pretty much all I have played is a Need for Speed game on my mobile and a version of Tetris on my mobile as well. So I have made a liar of myself and this podcast. I apologize for that. But essentially, yeah, I've been playing this game called. First of all, I started off playing a game called Tetris Blast, and the reason that one worked is because they were all all the Tetris games. It's not go for as long as you can and it speeds up. It is you have 2 minutes on the clock normally, and you normally have a number of objectives: get rid of a certain amount of lines or get the highest score in 2 minutes. And because it's just a short game, it doesn't speed up. It's kind of like set speeds. Some of them are faster, some of them are slower. And because of that, you don't feel the need to like build the lines exactly how you would and have that control. It kind of like puts in the ghost pieces and you tap where you want it to go. You can kind of cycle through those. I'll admit, I've already kind of stopped playing it. It got old a lot quicker than normal Tetris does. But even so, like that was a way that proved me wrong that Tetris can work on a mobile. It's just, maybe not the traditional type of Tetris. Have either of you come across like those kinds of versions of Tetris?
I haven't come across a mobile version. I was just actually I was watching a video of Tetris Effect, that PS4 game, just this morning actually, which looks phenomenally cool. I don't know if you've played that at all, Timmy, but
No.
yeah, I'm a big fan of Tetris in general, but I've never given it a go on mobile. Like I kind of had to really hunt around for a DS version of Tetris that was good that I could take away with me, because it's just such a like mainstay of gaming.
Absolutely. Like I think it might be the first game I got when I got my original Game Boy way back in the far-flung past of the 1990s.
Hmm.
And I remember I lost it in a furniture store, like when my parents were dragging me around, and I like was doing that thing as a kid where I'd packed my pockets full of my different games so I could be prepared should the mood take me for any game. But all that happened was that I lost Tetris, and it
Hey,
was a
you
very
you think you lost it in that furniture store, but maybe your dad hid that one as well.
yeah, he had absolutely. So yeah, so that's Tetris. That actually went down all right. Like most mobile games, they tried to implement a thing where you had kind of like energy, and it cost you like 2 bars of energy to play a game. And
Hmm.
eventually you would run out, or you could pay to refuel it. And that's almost always the deal breaker for me with games. Just because like most of the time it seems like there are a few games that do it quite well, I think, that they use it within the gameplay to limit you racing past your means. But when it's just like, we want you to spend money to keep playing this game, it it puts me off on the whole. Like I'll pay to download a game I like, but I don't want to have to keep paying because I'm enjoying it too much, you know?
Right.
So yeah, so that kind of put an end to that. Um, But the other one I've been playing, and this is the one that really surprised me, because like I'll normally give Tetris a go, but I've just always been right off racing games on mobiles. Is Need for Speed No Limits is what it's called, and it's just a really really well designed racing game. Like they've obviously gone, let's not just like do Need for Speed on a phone and you just tap and it's the same. They've gone, all right, limitations of a phone, advantages of a phone. How can we take advantage of both of those? And it's just a really simple, like, you tap on either side of the screen to turn in either direction, but it's not like, how you play some of those games, they put little joysticks that sit on the screen. So it limits the screen size and you have to touch it in the right spot. This is really just kind of like the outer 25% on either side of the screen. You can tap anywhere there and your car's going to turn. And then to activate your NOS, it's like a swipe up. And to start drifting, you just swipe down. And that is all it is. And, obviously different cars have different handling and you get used to that. And you can chain your drifting together and stuff, upgrade the vehicles. It's honestly like a really good racing game in general. And then it works really nicely on my phone. It looks fantastic. Like, obviously, Need for Speed have the brand power and the budget to make them look pretty good. But I'm having an absolute blast upgrading vehicles, like modding them out to make them look how I want. You unlock different stripes and colors and paint types and whatnot. It is, of course, an EA game, and so it is 40% shameless cash grab. Probably worse than Tetris. It's just that there are ways to get around the money stuff. Like, whereas in Tetris, you had no option but to wait or pay money. In Need for Speed, you earn gold. Like, you have the in-game dollar currency, but then you also earn gold, which is like the kind of limited currency for different things. And you can spend the gold to refill. And that's a lot more rare, but at least you can kind of slowly chip away winning that. And also, if you go up a level, it will refill your tank to full. And there are there's like 4 or 5 different kind of race types, and one of them is called Rivals, and it's kind of like you're playing against other players. Like, you see their ghost racing, and you have to beat them, and you go up levels and stuff. And that one never costs you energy to play, so you can keep doing something while you're waiting for it to refuel, and that'll keep earning you money and then potentially parts and stuff as well. So, like, even though a lot of their events are like you can only do so much during a day, and then you only have so many days to complete it, and you're going to have to pay money if you want to get right to the end of it, and it feels very EA and very frustrating. There is enough other good stuff there to keep you invested.
You mentioned before, just kind of going back to something you mentioned about Carmageddon Mobile early on in this episode, and you said how it was like real clunky and awful to control.
Yeah.
Like, and you said how this one is like so much better. Is that like, do you think, is that like by design that Carmageddon is supposed to be clunky or something like that?
Yeah.
Or is there something specific about this that just makes it, like, is this a better implementation of driving on mobile?
So it's both, right? Carmageddon is meant to be clunky and heavy and like that. This is meant to be really slick, and you're boosting everywhere, and it's just racing. It's not trying to slam into each other. You can try and take out other cars, but it's pretty difficult, and it's only going to really slow you down. Yeah, so it is definitely by design. It's also that Carmageddon game is very obviously a port of the very old game, whereas new and slick and yeah.
Are you playing through like some kind of campaign? Because I know recent Need for Speed games have gone pretty heavy on the story campaigns, like the sort of big console versions of them. Is it something like that, or is it just kind of individual races and upgrading your cars, that kind of thing?
There is a campaign, and I am playing through it. I'm at the point now where early on you could just keep you slamming through the campaign. Now, every couple of races, the PR or performance rating of your car needs to be a certain level before they'll let you do it. And that's actually another thing that kind of frustrates you in the same way that, I was saying there's a lot of kind of shameless cash grab sort of stuff, in that you can buy the parts to upgrade your car, or you can earn them by playing campaign levels or winning races, and you can replay the old ones. But they show you like what kind of how high the performance rating of your vehicle needs to be to do some races. And the frustrating thing is that when you hit the races have difficulty levels based on your performance rating. It'll say your performance rating is 500, so this race is going to be easy for you to win. Or it could be medium, hard, or extreme. Now, all of those are winnable. Like, extreme takes like a perfect run or a near perfect run, but you can do it, and it's really fun pushing yourself to do those. But every now and again, it locks an event or the campaign, or they have a thing called car series where you have to have a specific car to do a number of courses. They say you can't do this until your performance rating is at this number. And when you finally unlock that, it goes, cool, so this race is going to be easy or medium. And it's like, at least make it hard. Like, don't just lock it for the sake of trying to make me spend money to upgrade my vehicle. Like,
that's a bit,
because it's a really cool
game.
It's a really cool game. Yeah, and the progression is really cool. And the way, like, it's got a chop shop where you can like salvage parts to get different blueprints or different parts and scrap the stuff you don't need, or you can take something out of one car and put it into another car. And all that customizability is really cool. And you can buy individual parts for in-game currency or for real-world money, and you can do this and you can do that. But like the fact that sometimes it'll be like, this race is extreme, but good luck, and other times it'll be like, nope, you can't even attempt this until you get to this arbitrary number, and once you get there, you realize you could have finished that race days ago if I had let you have a crack at it at a higher difficulty.
That's really annoying. That reminds me of sort of, it's like a difficulty problem I've had with racing games in the past in terms of trying to find that sweet spot. And I can't remember whether we've talked about this on the pod before, but I took issue with old Forza games because the way Forza worked was you didn't gain like points for finishing in certain places in races or anything like that. You just had to win each race to progress. So if you had a 5-race series, you had to come first in every race, and then once you have finished first in every race, then that series is complete and you can move on to another one. And my problem with this was, me being someone who was not heaps good at these games, I just enjoyed them, was you have to then balance your difficulty to be able to win. And it's often hard to do that. You would end up either having it be too hard or too easy. And you would, you'd win by 2 laps, or you would never be able to win at all. And this was really frustrating. But in later games, they changed it to be, rather than winning each race, you just had to finish top 3 to like kind of progress through each one. And I thought this was one of the best changes Forza ever made, because it meant that you could tweak your difficulty so that it was a really tough battle to finish somewhere in the top 3. And I had so much more fun with those games when that was the requirement to kind of win each race. Right. You would get more money for finishing first, so it was more money for cars and upgrades. But just to progress through the different events, I would sort of tweak my settings so that it would be tough to win and kind of a battle in the top 3 for where I would finish. And it just made it so much more enjoyable. You kind of reminded me of it there when you said that once you unlock these races, you're kind of already too, you're already kind of too strong for these races once you get to that performance level. This was kind of, I know it's not exactly the same thing, but it just reminded me of a similar problem from Forza.
And see, they kind of try to compensate for that in this by making it so that every race you only win and advance by coming first, pretty much in everything. Any kind of event, any kind of like car series in the campaign, you always have to come first. So you still always have to race very well. But yeah, like what this changes is what defines very well, I suppose,
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it, you feel like, well, it stops being about how well I'm playing and just how much I've souped up my car. And you know what? Sometimes they get the balance absolutely right, and they have designed the courses very much keeping in mind that this is a mobile game, so they're a lot shorter than what you would play on a console version of Need for Speed. I think they're a really good length. You're normally racing for more than a minute and a half, sort of. That'd be a long one, I think. But yeah, it's just that limiting. And the thing is, when they limit you from doing the campaign, it limits the kind of what you can do to earn the more high level parts, because obviously cars, as you upgrade them, you need high quality parts. And replaying the old missions lets you get lower level parts, but when you're locked because you can't get your performance rating up and you can't get the parts you need without spending a whole lot of money and potentially real world money, then that becomes like really grating. But yeah, it's easy to focus on the bad stuff. But again, like I'm not someone who likes racing games on mobile really at all. I just tried another one because I've been enjoying this one and I went, yeah, this is exactly what I don't like. And so this one's really good. And I would recommend anybody like who's got a little bit of time and wondering about some new games on mobile, give it a sus.
All right, well, I don't know if I'm necessarily going to check it out on mobile, but it's giving me the urge to play some Forza when I next have access to my consoles. But we're going to take a quick break now and come back to continue talking about the stuff we've been playing.
Games.
Welcome back to Disc and Dice. Now, Timmy, you were talking about some mobile games just before we took that quick break.
Sure was.
I've actually been playing a mobile game as well, which was something I mentioned last week when we talked about the things we were going to play in the next month, which is a game called Bury Me My Love. Now, this game's been on my radar for a while. It came out in 2017, I think. And when we kind of had our mobile gaming section, I thought I would go back to this one, but I didn't quite get a chance to play it before last episode. However, I have played it in the time in between. So I think this is a really interesting mobile game in terms of a game that makes fantastic use of the mobile platform. So the game is basically a virtual text messaging app. And you play as a character who is sending text messages to his wife and receiving text messages in response. And the game is set in Syria during the civil war that is currently, as we speak, going on in Syria. And the wife is trying to flee as a refugee out of Syria, and you are kind of talking with her as she goes through this process. And the gameplay is almost entirely in the form of text messages. Every now and then there are pictures that are sent back and forward, but basically you receive text messages from her and you can pick from a number of replies in terms of what you will say. And this allows you to make decisions about what she does, which is a really interesting system, I think, because there is choice in the game. So you are kind of an active participant in that she will have a situation where she says, oh, should I get a cab to this place or should I just take the bus to save money? And you will get to suggest one or the other. So you have some agency over what she is doing. But because you're not making the decision, because you're not playing as her character, it feels kind of strange. It feels like you get to choose, but then the consequences are totally out of your hands once you make that decision.
Can I ask on that really quickly?
Mm-hmm.
What she's asking, like, oh, should I catch a cab or should I get on the bus?
Mm-hmm.
Has there been any instances where you've said, oh, catch a bus, and in the end she's decided not to do that, like she's gone with the other option? Or is it always kind of she trusts you and then the consequences are based on that decision you made?
So far it's been that she will generally trust what you say and do that. Sometimes there will be, some situations will have like good or bad outcomes. So it can mean that because of something bad will happen, and then like maybe you'll end up having an argument with her or something like that, which can happen. But generally it's like this is the system of choice in the game that is kind of like this is the method by which they give you choice, is through these situations. So this is kind of more than just like I wouldn't say it's like a walking simulator type thing where it's completely linear and you're just sort of along for the ride. Like you have choices, and I think there are around 20 or so different endings that the game can have. And it's being mostly text-based and quite short, it allows it to kind of have these different ways it can spin off. Now, the reason that I think it is such an interesting use of mobile is that, like I said, it basically just works like a messaging app. And the way it is set to play by default, which I would encourage anyone who's playing this game to absolutely play it this way, is by default it is set up to give you notifications on your phone and to play out in real time. So what happens is like one day I will be, sending these messages to her and she'll be saying that, oh, I'm trying to find, somewhere to stay in Istanbul while she tries to find someone to help her across the border. And so you will talk to her and make decisions, and that will mean she chooses a place to stay. But then you will not receive another message from her for like 12 hours real time, because it's as if she is staying in that hotel and she speaks to you the next day. And so when you actually play the game, it plays out over a number of days as this happens. And you can set it to play at full speed. And if you set it to play at full speed, it will just play out one event after the other, and it will take around about 2 hours to play. But I would really encourage someone, the first time they play it, to let it happen in real time, because it's a thing that you just come back to. And now I will you can kind of pick up your phone and be like, oh, I have a message from the person in this game. And then there will be the next scenario that you have to deal with, sort of waiting for you to play.
does it ever get impact, like playing that way? Is there ever any impact if, they send you a message and you're in the middle of doing something like work or sleeping, or you've been sick in real life and you take hours and hours to reply? Is there any impact, like something can happen or you've lost an opportunity to do something?
No. When they send the next message, it just kind of waits, and it waits for you to respond to that message. I think it would be kind of ridiculous if you could possibly miss that, considering that like you can absolutely receive a message in the middle of the night from her. So no, it always waits for you to sort of make your decision before the story progresses.
Cool.
I'm interested, Paul, about the parallels between that and say what you might find in a point-and-click adventure kind of game. Is it sort of a similar sort of narrative style to what you might find there? Because I know that that those are very much, I guess, you choosing the adventure or choosing the storyline that you want to go down.
I would say it is much more like a choose your own adventure rather than a point and click, because it doesn't have that point and click aspect of you don't explore any environments, you don't sort of get any objects, you don't have to solve puzzles or anything like that. It is just narrative that is in the form of text messages, and from time to time you have to make decisions which kind of branch the story at various points. So yeah, I'd say choose your own adventure is kind of what it is like. Now it has just been released, maybe like early this year. It came out on Switch and PC, but I played it on mobile, and I have to say that I think it would really lose something playing it on Switch or PC, because it is so perfectly built for mobile. So yeah, if people are interested in this, I would encourage them to not play it on one of those other platforms. There's not like Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I'm actually really surprised to hear that it wasn't on mobile first.
No, it was. It was on mobile 2 years ago, and it's just come out this year on Switch and PC.
Have you accidentally messaged someone thinking you were messaging the game? Is what I want to know. Has that happened yet?
Well,
that's the kind of thing I feel like I would do.
The way it works is that you don't type your responses to her. You choose the responses from a list.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, so it's, the game, you do not interact with it and choose your own words. It'll give you like 2 or 3 responses, and you pick the one that you want to send. So yeah, it's not possible. I haven't had that, but I have kind of had the weird sort of like kind of total immersion thing where I kind of check my phone and I'm kind of like, oh, I got another message from my wife who's fleeing from Syria and stuff like that, where, I kind of like, I see it almost as like, I see it and I'm kind of like, oh, I wonder how she went getting a ticket for the boat and things like that, because that was the last conversation we had. So I guess this is another reason why I'd really would strongly suggest that people don't up the speed of the game, because if you do that, you lose all of that effect. It will just mean that, she will tell you that, oh, I'm going to go and try and find, somewhere to stay for tonight. And then instantly you will just be jumped forward 5 hours in time and, you'll be on to the next thing. I think the way that is kind of intended is that because the game can play out in so many ways, play through it first in real time, and then if you want to play through it again to see what different endings you can get, you can speed it up and it will play out in a couple of hours.
Do you know how that works on the console system? So, because obviously on your phone it's coming up like a notification, but if you're on a console, does it come up as like a chat message in the in-game UI, or is it? Do you know how that works?
I do, and I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I had forgotten to say that on Switch and PC, it only plays out at full speed. There is no option to have it play in real time. So I would say it's another reason why you shouldn't play it on those platforms, because there's no option to have it play like that. There's not actually a whole lot more I want to say about it, because, as with any game like this, the main draw of it is the narrative. And so I don't want to kind of give away any details about like how it ends or the different endings you can get, because it's kind of the whole reason that you play it. But I can say that I have really enjoyed it, and I just find it's incredibly novel and unique in terms of how a game can play. Like I've never played a game that plays like this, which which is really cool. The only negatives I would say are some technical issues. It's crashed a few times, and sometimes there are some like glitches with the message feed where I try to like scroll up and see previous messages and it kind of glitches out and doesn't work. I think some of these might be because my phone is quite old, but I'm not really sure. So yeah, some technical issues, but beside that, yeah, I've been really enjoying it.
That sounds great.
That does sound really cool. I know last time you mentioned it, I'm pretty sure I added it to a list along with some of the other games you were talking about. But yeah. Now, while you're talking about kind of highly recommended mobile games, and I'm not sure if this one you were going to play on mobile, but I noticed it in the App Store the other day. You mentioned you were going to play To the Moon.
I was going to play To the Moon, and I have played To the Moon, and I have not played it on mobile. So I played it on PC.
Okay.
Gotcha. I'm not sure with that one. I don't know whether it was initially a mobile game and came to PC. I have no idea, actually. But yeah, so To the Moon has been on my sort of on my urgent to playlist for quite a while, which suggests it's not that urgent. But I finally got around to playing it, and it is, well, if I was talking about Bury Me My Love, the previous game, and saying it was not a walking simulator, that you had a lot of choice, I would say that To the Moon is much more like a walking simulator. It is a linear story that you really are just kind of along for the ride. There's no real kind of meaningful choice or kind of puzzles or anything like that. You just kind of play through the story, and it all plays out kind of very simply and easily. There's no sort of challenge to anything. And we have briefly discussed this before with regular guest Moz, who is a big advocate for this game. So I won't say too much about it, but it's basically like an old school pixel art game. A lot of the kind of styling of it is like one of those old school games like that. So pixel art, kind of very basic controls, that kind of like, 8-bit, 16-bit music stuff. I don't at all know what I'm talking about there, so someone could probably correct me, but that kind of old style of game like that, the old sort of pixel adventure RPG style thing. And basically it is a time travel love story, which has quite an interesting concept where you start at the end of the story and you work your way backwards through it across the game, which again was quite unique. I thought that was quite good. And really at the forefront of this game is the story, which is really quite touching and personal. Like I said, it's basically a love story. And yeah, like I don't have a lot to say about it. There's not a lot you can say without spoiling things, but you are kind of playing as a character who, through an interesting kind of sci-fi mechanic, you travel back in time through someone's memories in order to fulfill their dying wish. So you are trying to alter their memories so that you can give them a memory that they have always wanted their whole life, which is kind of, yeah, it's an interesting sort of sci-fi concept. And then there are a bunch of ways that it plays out, and you deal with or you look at different phases of that person's life. You see how they met various people in their life. You see how they loved various people, lost various people, things like that. And yeah, you kind of get an idea of how their life played out. And then, yeah, there is this kind of time travel memory aspect, which I don't want to say anything more about because that's really the core of the story.
I was just going to say, going back to kind of how I led into this, would you imagine any of what makes that game so special would be lost doing it on mobile?
No, I don't think so. I think it would be perfectly fine on mobile. I don't think there's anything... Yeah, there's nothing specific about it that I felt on PC made it better. So I'd say, yeah, definitely go ahead on that with mobile. I think in terms of like recommending this game, I wouldn't say I enjoyed it as much as any of the other kind of walking simulator type things, like really linear games we've discussed, like Gone Home, Firewatch, that sort of stuff. I'd say I liked all of those more. This game has sequels to The Moon. I probably won't play them. I'm probably happy to just play this one, and that's enough for me of this sort of thing. But if you like the kind of art style and the tone of it, which I would say is like, it's kind of quirky and lighthearted a lot of the time. And, if there's anyone listening, they will probably, take issue with how I'm describing this. But to me, as someone who doesn't watch anime at all, it feels like it has a very anime feel to like the dialogue and the story and the tone, in that it's kind of a little bit silly at times, that it will kind of very jarringly go from like serious to jokes and things like that. Personally, I don't really like this kind of narrative style, which is why, like I say, I enjoyed it, but I probably wouldn't play another game like this. But if that is the kind of storytelling that you enjoy, I think this is a really kind of, well, quite kind of tender and emotional narrative, which is worth playing through. So I don't know if that's the kind of thing that catches your eye, Timmy.
Yeah, it sounds good to me. I'm definitely keen. These mobile games with kind of like touching narratives are really starting to stack up now. the last couple of episodes.
Yeah, add that one to the list as well.
Absolutely. Now, from one touching, engaging narrative to the complete opposite, I've gone back to Octopath Traveler. And as negative as that sounds, I'm having a really good time with it. I have just taken to skipping basically all of the dialogue at all times.
Is that because you've gone back to it and you've played it before, or is it because the story is not engaging?
It's because the story is repetitive. Because like you kind of have to go through and play an episode of this person's story and an episode of that person and then this person and then this person. Once you've done the kind of level 1 episode for all 8 characters, then you go and do the level 2 episode for all 8 characters. And first of all, like it's like an old Final Fantasy kind of nearly isometric kind of 2D JRPG look.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, they try to make the characters expressive in ways that just means it takes so long for the dialogue to get out. So they'll say half a line, and then their little sprite will turn to the character, turn like the other way, and take one step, and then drop their head to signify that they're feeling sad or something about whatever they're about to say, and then the dialogue will continue. But there's only so much you can do. So I've seen every character do all of the possible things. So first of all, it just takes so long. I'm constantly sounding like yes, get to the next bit of dialogue. And then also all of the episodes feel like they have been like they were written like that. Like episode, instead of looking at someone's whole episodic arc and having a really nice follow through and then it being split up by you needing to do different things in the world, it feels like they've all gone like mini arc, mini arc, mini arc, mini arc. And they all go the same way. It's all you meet someone, they say they need this thing, or or you meet an antagonist and they take a thing, and then you have to go around the town and either get an object to be able to face that person or find out more information. And then they always point you to somewhere just outside of the town you're in. You have to fight through a cave or a woods, and then you get to the big beast at the end. And either it's a monster and you best them and get the thing you need, or it's a villain and the main villain escapes to continue the story. It's super repetitive, but the gameplay is really fun and the character progression is really fun. It's so repetitive, and I know I have to do it so many times and I can go to my journal anytime and read where they're at in their story. So this endless dialogue that is not very interesting and not very well written, there's no value to it.
Right. So I was going to ask, why have you gone back to it then, if this is the case? But it sounds like it's like the gameplay systems.
Yeah, and I mean, like, imagine if you were playing like Chrono Trigger, for example, and in that game, Chrono and Luca and Frog and Marl all have their different motivations and different things they want to do. But imagine if instead of when you're walking around, you're potentially encountering little things to forward each of their stories, you had to, one at a time, do the next part of Chrono's story, and then when he's done, you do the next part of Luca's story. And instead of encountering little different things and enjoying them as they mesh together, it's one at a time, and they always follow the same formula in those little moments.
Mm-hmm.
Because their stories, those 4 stories from Chrono Trigger, may follow the same formula if you were to break it down. They're all traditional heroes' journeys. But because you're getting them all meshing together and different things happening at different times, it feels fresh and like, oh, I was in the middle of doing this for Frog, and all of a sudden, you know, I've got a clue as to where I'm going to be heading next with Chrono and stuff like that. Whereas you don't get any of that in this, you know. Yeah. So, but the gameplay's fun. Like the overall story, I'm hoping they start coming together. I'm not just playing 8 separate stories at once, and there's never going to be any crossover. But we'll find out.
What is it about the gameplay stuff that's so good then?
I'm just a sucker for those kind of old school turn-based RPG battles. You know, they've all got different strengths and stuff, and it's about making sure your party is covered for each kind of foe you could come across. And like, you know, as you discover more things in the game, you get to give your characters secondary jobs. So I might have a hunter in my squad and a warrior, but then I find the ability to give the hunter job to somebody else. So now I swap out my hunter and put in my thief and give either the warrior or the thief the secondary job as a hunter and stuff like that. And it's kind of a bit involved in the way you build your squad and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. One thing about Octopath Traveler, I don't know if I mentioned this last time we talked about it. Maybe I did. But I have seen footage of it. I haven't played it. It has a really cool art style, doesn't it? It's like this kind of like it's pixel art as well, like some of these things we've discussed, but it's like really modern with like depth of field and 3D everything.
So they call it 2HD. So like 2D, but with an H in there. Because, it's like the old Final Fantasies, except they've given it depth. And the way they do that is if you move forward towards the camera, it'll blur the background and stuff. And so it's not just always side to side and up and down.
It's a very cool look when I've seen like videos of it and stuff like that. It's like, I think, you described it exactly as what it is. It looks like one of those old school games if it was made now, but not in the way that like To the Moon is also a modern game made in a pixel art style, but it looks like an old game. Like this does not look like an old game, but it is in that style.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like a lot of the time, like I see like stills of a game that looks old and pixel art, and I think that's really cool. And then it gets old kind of quickly. It's like they kind of lent on the nostalgia there, and it just plays like one of those old games, which of course we've all played now.
Right.
Like they've hit the nostalgia beat by making it look like those old games. Like they look like a Dragon Quest or a Chrono Trigger or Final Fantasy 3 kind of thing. But then they've kind of updated it like in some interesting ways. And, you know, they're not, like I said, the narrative isn't thrilling me. You know, I'm struggling to keep my characters leveled up to certain things. So I was really enjoying the grind. But now I've been doing it for a while that I'm starting to realize why I maybe slowed down. But I've got no problem with putting this game down and coming back to it, you know? Like, it's got a good journal system, so I can always go, oh, that's what I was doing. I remember. So,
That is a good journal system for, like, an RPG like that is pretty crucial, I gotta say.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, I kind of launched into that, sounding very negative, but, like, I still really recommend that game. A lot of fun, especially if you don't mind putting it down and picking it up from time to time. It's a good travel game for me. I like taking that one with me because you can play a little bit and just put it away. But yeah, Octopath Traveler. There you go. Now that about does us for what we've been playing this week. And normally at this point, we would lead into kind of our topic discussion for this episode. But instead, we are going to focus on a bit of listener mail we got from one of our listeners. So, Paul, did you want to read that one for us? And then we can have a bit of a chat.
We did indeed get some listener mail. So, another email from regular emailer Josh, who writes to us and says, "Hey, Dice Arenos, I recently got my old PS4 and game library back from my brother, which was amazing in itself, but also created a new hobby of building a library of platform-only games. I'm currently collecting physical PS3 exclusive games that are not available for download and have never been remastered for PS4. And he says in brackets, it's basically the Tony Hawk series. Do you have any console-specific games that you love that not many people will be able to play, or that even you can't currently play? Love the show, and also love hearing about JT's quest to finish his Steam library, and would love to keep hearing about it, which I think we'd all love to keep hearing about. That's going to be a regular feature.
Yeah, JT, you're not
then.
allowed. Yeah, you have to do this podcast forever until you finish the Steam library.
Oh God. Have you seen the Steam deals? That could take many, many, many years.
So in terms of Josh's question, though, yeah, what did you guys think about this? Do you have any games that you can think of that aren't able to be played anymore, or things like that?
Well, I mean, like, I went from Xbox 360 to PS4, so I'd never had any kind of backwards compatibility, and so I don't know if any of the games that I'm about to talk about had that kind of backwards compatibility. But one game that I absolutely loved that no one ever talks about, and I've never seen a remaster, is called, in Australia, it was the Project Zero series. Elsewhere, it was called Fatal Frame. And the one that I loved was Project Zero 2, The Crimson Butterfly. And I got that. I bought a game from EB that I was after, and it was like, oh, because you bought that, you can get like half price Xbox original games. And that game played on the 360, even though it was an old one. So I'm sure now it doesn't play through onto anything else. But it was just like, it was a straight up horror game. You are one twin sister who got lost who has lost her twin in a Japanese forest in this abandoned village. And you're trying to find her, and there are ghosts everywhere, and you have the camera obscura, and that's the only way you can see the ghosts. That's one of the really powerful things about it. Like, so you kind of see the ghosts, but you can only kind of deal with them using the camera. You have to pull the camera up, and it really obscures your view. It goes into first person at that point. And it's just absolutely terrifying. It scared the crap out of me to the point where I would only play it during the day with all the lights on and with other people in the house so that I could hear them nearby. It was just, and I could still only play for maybe an hour at a time because I would be so on edge. Like, I would actually feel like my heart would be pumping.
For me, it would probably be Rogue Squadron series, I reckon. So there were 3 games in total that ever really got released. So I think maybe some people remember Rogue Squadron was on Nintendo 64, which is when I first played it, and it eventually came to PC. However, the next 2 games, which are, in my opinion, the best ones, Rogue Squadron 2, which was Rogue Leader, and 3, I think, was called Rebel Strike, I reckon it was called. Those only ended up going to GameCube, and they really, really captured that space battle element of the Star Wars series really, really well. And those never got released for any of the succeeding Nintendo platforms, unfortunately. So, I mean, for anyone with a GameCube, that's a great series to get into because it's got the only accurate sort of version of the Hoth battle and Death Star trench run that I've really ever seen, done really, really well. And yeah, unfortunately, they didn't bring them to PC, and they just they're still just on GameCube. So it's one of the exclusives that I'd really, really like to play again. Should they bring it onto anything else?
That's interesting because I know that the first Rogue Squadron, I think, is on like Good Old Games because it got a PC release. So they kind of, redid that one so you can play it now. But yeah, I have to say, I didn't even know about the 2 other Rogue Squadron games. I only knew about the first one.
Yeah, and the third was also the only one to have a multiplayer aspect as well. Obviously, it was like a local sort of thing, play with a friend or 2. Might be up to 4 people. But yeah, that co-op and versus battles, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And the other 2 didn't have that. So, a bit disappointing that they didn't continue the series either, because they were great games in my opinion.
Just while we're talking about Star Wars, a couple of games that I really want to see, and I don't even care if they bother remastering them, just put them on a platform I can play. I want those Star Wars Battlefront games, the first 2, especially after the debacle of the rebooted franchise, which has been, luster at best on both attempts. I love those games. It might be because I played so much split screen of them with my little brother, but I want, local multiplayer, and I want those old game styles, and I don't want to have to pay to unlock characters and stuff. I want the characters that I can play to make sense for the level I'm on and based on my in-game play, Like, they were just such simple, good games, and I really miss those.
I think, again, this probably doesn't help you in your current situation. But both of those as well, I think, have been like not remastered, but have been released on GOG. So sort of, updated so they run on current PCs. But yeah, unfortunately, I guess with new Battlefront games coming out, I guess the chance of them getting a re-release on consoles would be very low. I would assume. They want you buying those new ones with them shiny loot boxes.
Yep, they certainly do.
Now, in terms of my thoughts about Josh's question, I feel like I didn't have answers that are really as good as your guys' ones. In terms of things I have that are difficult to play now, the first thing that came to mind were some of the old PC not RPGs or RPGs, but MMOs that I have that now are no longer working, basically. So stuff like Guild Wars 1 and Warhammer Online, which were two games that I played a whole bunch of, which are just kind of like, they're just lost to time now. It's like it's not possible. Like, maybe there's a private server running for those things, but in terms of playing them officially, those games just no longer exist anymore. And I do have a couple of those, like, in PC boxes sitting on my shelves at home, which, yeah, are just no longer able to be played anymore. And in terms of console stuff, as I've mentioned before, and this episode, I haven't been a console gamer for my entire gaming life, but the first thing I thought of here was some of those music and rhythm games, like Guitar Hero and Rock Band, that I have a whole bunch of those sitting on my shelf, but I'm not entirely sure where all the plastic instruments are, and I did kind of wonder, like, those games just become unplayable once your instruments break, or once you don't have the peripherals for that. It's not like you can play Guitar Hero on a controller. Like, I guess technically you can, but it's not really what you want to do. And I kind of wonder now whether, if I wanted to go back to those, is that even possible without hunting down and finding those instruments? Because I just don't have them around the place anymore. And apart from that, in terms of games that I would like to see kind of updated, the Commandos series for PC, which I'm pretty sure, JT, you played these games back in the day as well.
Yes, they're great series.
Yeah, they are a game which has been re-released on Steam and GOG, but I have always had kind of technical troubles with them running too fast. That kind of problem that old games often have when they're running on new hardware, where they're not like limited in terms of the speed they run, and so they just kind of go in like turbo mode, and they just run way too fast and become unplayable. That I've actually purchased those Commandos games on two different modern platforms and had too many technical problems with both of them. So I would really quite like to see a proper re-release of those that is kind of controlled for modern PCs. And the only other thing that I had thought of when I was thinking about this question was, in terms of Josh collecting this old library of PS3 games, something I recently tried to do was get my hands on a bunch of DS, mainly DS, but some 3DS games, which I didn't have in my collection. And some of these were things like, Timmy, you just mentioned Chrono Trigger when you were talking about Octopath Traveler. Stuff like Chrono Trigger, some old RPGs, like maybe some like old Dragon Quests that are supposed to be quite good on the DS. It is really difficult to get your hands on a lot of those games nowadays, because I'm guessing they just had fairly short production runs in terms of the physical copies, and Nintendo really haven't done a lot to digitize a lot of those things. So there's a real kind of scarcity of a lot of that stuff, and if you have those DS games, they basically sell for the price of full price games or more nowadays. Like the old Pokemon games especially, because you just can't get your hands on those anymore, and they're not on the Nintendo store. And this was just something I thought of, that when I kind of decided, all right, I'm going to fill out my collection, get all these DS games I've always wanted to play, and then I suddenly realized, like, God, it's going to cost me like $500. I just figured I'd get this stuff, I figured I'd pick up Chrono Trigger for DS for like $5 secondhand, but it's like, no, they're all selling for like $60 minimum on eBay because this stuff's just not available.
See, that's so interesting, because I was walking out of like a secondhand like record store in Melbourne a couple of weeks ago, and there was a little stand there which had some like old Pokemon games in it. It had like their Pokemon Silver, I think. It was asking for like $60 or something, and it was like, vintage games, and I was just like, oh, come on, surely you can just go into cash converters and there's gonna be 1,000 of those. So I'm
that's
surprised.
Not the case.
No, all right, people. I guess like we're all hoarders now, right? We've all watched countless like TV shows where somebody has like some game that ends up being valuable, or comics or figurines in the boxes, and everyone keeps everything now.
Yeah, I think the Pokemon thing, I think, is like a lot of it with Pokemon is that you have to have the game to get those Pokemon, so they become valuable for people who want to get the full Pokedex. Just like an anecdote on that is my sister a couple of years ago had a whole bunch of old DS games, and she was just having a garage sale clearing them out. And I remember she sent me a message and was like, oh, these are the games I'm selling. Let me know if you want any of them. And she had Pokemon Soul Silver there. And she kind of was just like, I'm just selling them all for like $2. And I was, I didn't actually want it, but I was like, don't sell that for $2. Like, put that on eBay. And she got like $80 or something for it on eBay because it's kind of compatible with the new generation, so you can get all the silver Pokemon and then bring them over into the new games. So yeah, top tip for people out there: if you've got big DS collections and you want to make some money, then yeah, check that stuff on eBay.
Big DS. All right. So thank you, Josh, so much for that question. If you would like to send a question in yourself, you can send one to discanddice@gmail.com. That's how Josh hit us up. But you can also just flick us a tweet on Twitter with Disc and Dice there, or head to Disc and Dice on Facebook. Now, fellas, what are you both looking at playing before the next episode? What's the plan?
So last episode I mentioned that I was going to be playing a bunch of Total War, which I actually have been playing the last month, but just didn't really have time to fit it into today's discussion. So I'm going to keep playing that. I'm working my way through some of the expansions for Rome Total War at the moment. So next episode, I've probably got some things to say. Total War is one of my real favorite series, so I've been really enjoying that. And the other thing I'm hoping to play before next episode is Undertale, which is I'm sort of struggling to describe it, having not played it yet, but it's kind of a sort of old school pixely style RPG, which has received a lot of critical acclaim, and again has been on my list of things to play for quite a while. And as I've been whittling that down, Undertale is next on the list. So yeah, I'm going to be giving that a go. It's not too long in terms of the length of the game. I think it's about sort of 10 to 12 hours. So I'm hoping to have that finished off in time to talk about next episode.
I am probably going to play a buttload more of Need for Speed, because I'm just like so into that. Like, I'm at the point where I'm like on the way to work and playing like the daily events and stuff to make sure I'm getting every possible like blueprint and whatnot I can get. So they've suckered me in. I've made a couple of the $2.99 purchases, so I'm well and truly on the hook for all my complaining about having to pay stuff, but I'm trying to limit myself.
That's how they get you.
That is how they get you. And the other thing I'm going to play is I kind of haven't played a lot of it recently, but I'm up to Forsaken in Destiny 2 now. So I'm hoping to purchase that and play through it pretty soon. I hear that this is like kind of people who love Destiny 2, Forsaken is where it kind of changed to being the game they love, and so there's a lot of goodwill towards it, and apparently it's the highlight in terms of narrative and stuff, so I'm pretty keen to check it out.
Now, based on your discussion of Destiny from last week, Timmy, and then my subsequent editing of our last episode, I have got really into the Destiny soundtracks. I don't play the games at all. I don't have any of them, but yeah, as you said last episode, those are some damn good like symphonic game soundtracks. They really capture that same kind of vibe as Halo. I think one of the composers heavily involved in both games. But yeah, great soundtracks.
Yeah, I've really been enjoying the soundtracks. Like we kind of chatted about, like playing more with headphones now, taking a lot more of that in. But yeah, excellent soundtracks. Bungie really can be trusted. JT, what about you, mate?
I will hopefully be finally getting around to doing Assassin's Creed Revelations, because I know I was talking about hopefully getting that started by this week's podcast. However, as time would tell, I have not yet. So hopefully I'll be able to download that up pretty soon and get into that. But apart from that, I might be also jumping the gun on my list of Steam library, because one game I really want to get into that I purchased not too long ago, a game called Kenshi, which is sort of like a very large open world game that I've heard is very, very sandbox, a little bit more so than what you might expect a sandbox game to be. So I'm not really sure how that, being that I haven't played it, I'm not really sure how sandboxy that is meant to be. So hopefully next episode I can give you a bit of a tell about what they mean by that. So excited to check that out.
I think that's one that you've mentioned before, just sort of in our chats offline, I think. So I'm interested to hear about that, because it sounds like the scope of it is kind of a bit insane.
Yes. I mean, it's one of the games where you can really pick. I mean, some people have actually likened it to the old Star Wars Galaxy MMO, which is where you could really do a lot of unconventional professions, like be a farmer or a musician or something, and still get XP for that kind of thing. So I'll be very interested to see just how far you can go with that sort of open-ended world feel.
You mentioned Star Wars Galaxy. I'm now just reminiscing about some parts of that. That was wasn't it initially in Star Wars Galaxies when it first came out, that the way the Jedi system worked is that people randomly were Force sensitive and could become Jedis. It wasn't like you picked it as a class. And then later on, they kind of overhauled the whole system because they realized that, 90% of players just want to have a Jedi power fantasy. And so they all want to play Jedis. But initially it was super hardcore, and you didn't get to choose if you were Force sensitive. I could be wrong, but I think there was an early mechanic like that.
There were a few little things like that, yes.
Cool.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because it was such that game had so many great little ideas in it, and none of them were really implemented good at all. So
right,
we can always.
I'm all for the anyone can be a Jedi kind of thing, right? Like I hate the midi-chlorians sort of thing from the prequels, and I don't mind there being kind of some natural skill element to it, but if you work hard enough at it, kind of I always liken it to being a musician. Some people are naturally talented and don't have to train very much. Other people are both talented and train. Other people, whatever, and that's cool. But I like the idea that you can't just pick Jedi as a class.
Mm-hmm.
There's still an element of maybe you're how Leia is Force sensitive, but not necessarily a Jedi, and Luke's the same, and then he trains and whatnot, and people argue that Han is too. Just that kind of varying degrees of Force sensitivity, and it being random whether you've got enough to train as a Jedi is cool as heck.
It is.
That's so great.
Yeah, it's very cool. I feel like that's a game that in some ways was I don't know if I'd say ahead of its time, but I feel like
because it would never happen now.
Well, this is the thing though. I feel like if that game got released now, it would probably do well because, I don't know, the internet is established and a community would develop strong enough that the game would have its own little dedicated fan base and it'd chug along like that.
Yeah.
Because there are EVE Online is super hardcore, and it's, it's done its own thing for it's maybe not massive, but it's like it's big enough, to like sustain itself. I feel like that kind of hardcore RPG people would like go in for that now, maybe more than they did back then. I guess the thing now is just that with the hands that Star Wars are in now, for all the like positives of that, and there are many of them, no way in hell they're making a game like that.
That means we're also never getting X-Wing versus TIE Fighter 2, which pains me to say.
Yeah, that is disappointing. But that is also the end of this episode of Disc and Dice. So, as Timmy mentioned before, if you want to get in touch with us, you can always send an email to discanddice@gmail.com. If you have a question you want to ask us, a suggestion of a discussion topic, or anything like that, you can always email us there. In terms of social media, you can find us at all the usual places. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/discanddice. We're on Twitter @discanddice. And on all your usual podcast platforms, we are there. So we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on all of the Android apps, and we are just, as of a few days ago now, on Spotify. So if that's your platform of choice, you can find us there. Woo. We definitely deserved a round of applause for just linking that RSS feed to the Spotify page. But yeah, basically, wherever you get your podcasts, we always appreciate a subscribe, and a rating and a review, all that kind of stuff. All that stuff helps, and we appreciate it all. So that is it for this month. JT, thank you for joining us once again.
No worries.
And
glad to be here.
We look forward to hearing what is next in the alphabetical gaming quest that you're on.
Yeah.
Yes, well, hopefully it doesn't fall apart too quickly. So I'll try and stick to it.
Look, this is what I'll do. We'll create some theme music for that segment. We'll make it a whole thing, so you feel a suitable amount of pressure to keep doing it.
Great. That sounds perfect.
I got to be honest, I do not hate that idea at all. Let's discuss that further. And Timmy, once again, as always, thank you for being here.
Always a pleasure.
And to those listeners out there, we will see you or speak to you next month.
Games.